All right, we've hit the record button, so we're going to go ahead and get started for this evening. We're picking up in Judges 13, and we've got to move through the story of Samson. Of all of the stories that people seem to miss the story of, Samson is probably that. I think that I grew up with an understanding that Samson was basically the Bible's version of Hercules. Like that's basically the way that I came away from it. And I think my experience, unfortunately, is not unique. Though Samson is incredibly strong, there is a source to his strength, and no, it's really not his hair, as we're going to find out. And really the characterizing of Samson as the big good guy who beats up the bad guys really is not what the text seems to reveal. Samson, for the most part, is a pretty bad guy, and yet God is still working and still moving in this man's life, and clearly has some kind of an effect upon him, and especially so as his life comes to an end. So let's talk about the bad judge who had a good end, and we'll start off with in chapter 13 here. So an angel appears to the barren wife of Manoah. You occasionally get these slices of life. We don't know who Manoah is really, but there's obviously a little bit more to it than that, as we're going to see. Manoah and his wife are barren. To set the stage for this, when we talk about barrenness and the ancient world in 1 Samuel, that's really a bad thing, like for people living back then. And people living back then really desperately wanted to have children. And you can see that when you get into 1 Samuel and read that heartfelt prayer of Hannah. People just really wanted to have a child. And yet this couple doesn't have one. So an angel appears and gives them first appears to Manoah's wife and has this really fantastic news for her. She's going to have a child. But the Lord says that this child is going to be a Nazirite, as it says in verse number 5, which, among other things, means he's not supposed to drink wine or strong or similar drink. He's not to eat anything unclean, and then no razor is going to come upon his head. Basically, as we're going to find out, the only part of all of that Samson really seems to take seriously is the razor on his head part. But you can see that the vow consists of more than that, right? And that's kind of spelled out in the text. If we didn't have the text saying that, we could, of course, go back to the law of Moses and find the origins of this vow. And if you're wondering about the Nazirite vow in general, I'll give you the kind of Reader's Digest version of it. So basically, there was opportunities. The people of Israel were supposed to be consecrated to God, but there were opportunities to set yourself further apart in consecration to God, usually for a period, usually not for your whole life. And when you did that, you would take what's called this Nazirite vow. And so it's a vow further separating you, supposedly, further focusing yourself upon the Lord and for his purposes, depending upon, obviously drunkenness is not to be a part of this, but not even any kind of, when you read wine, that encapsulates obviously the alcoholic form and the non-alcoholic form, as the word does, both in the Hebrew and the Greek. And so there's to be nothing celebratory about this person's life, nothing other than the basic, what do I need to get by? And, kind of this idea that I'm fully dependent and fully focused upon God. And so not even stopping to cut my hair or whatever, So
is the word here, when it says now drink no wine or similar drink, is the word wine there actually either, or is it specifically referring to an alcoholic beverage?
It's always either, whether we're dealing with yayin in the Hebrew or oinos in the Greek, probably given the similar drink kind of nature, probably people are going to walk away thinking primarily alcohol, but it certainly encapsulates the other, there's a a book written by one of our brothers, Jim McGuigan, what's it called? But anyway, he talks about and there's a number of different resources that talk about that you have this one word and it kind of goes both ways depending upon context. I think that what you're seeing in this kind of individual is the idea of a Nazirite is that obviously we're not going to be under the influence of any other spirits or alcohol, but then of course there's nothing extravagant or extraordinary about this individual, and so not anything more than what's needed, kind of thing. But yeah, so in when Manoah comes home, his wife tells him what's happened, and Manoah prayed this kind of interesting prayer, and in verse number 8, "Oh my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we shall do for the child who will be born." Now it's like, well, Manoah, weren't you paying attention? I mean, the angel told you what you were supposed to do for the child who was going to be born. Your wife told you. It's like he kind of wants the same thing again. Well, what does this seem to imply about the times in which Manoah and his wife lived, or perhaps about Manoah himself? That the fact that he's asking for the man of God to come and teach us again about this.
He didn't really believe it. Like, God hasn't appeared in ages, so he's like, are you
maybe he doesn't believe, maybe
up?
there hasn't been a lot of yeah, you're right, Joey, maybe there hasn't been a lot of God talking to individuals. Maybe this is I want confirmation, although as the text continues, I don't know about you, but I get the impression that Manoah, though his son Samson does show a certain cleverness, Manoah seems to lack it, to put it politely. He just doesn't, things don't seem to click with him very easily. As we're gonna find out. But at the very least, God hasn't talked in a long time, maybe. And then, maybe he hears this and it's just so foreign to him. He's like, well, tell me again, like, what is this Nazirite vow? You get the sense that biblical literacy and understanding is decaying in and amongst God's people. And we're really going to get a full sense of that when we get to chapter 17. All right. So maybe Manoah is kind of a product of his times in this way. And as we're going to see, that kind of bears out as the text continues.
Yeah, so, I don't think, from my reading of it, I don't think that the disbelief or lack of faith is what we're seeing here. Just because when he does get that confirmation, it's his first line is, "Now, when your word comes true," et cetera, et cetera. So he seems to be trusting in that, as you kind of said, and so it must be something else, some other sort of confusion or need for confirmation that he's
it's not a lack of faith, but it is a lack of understanding, and you'll see that especially as we get further in the account here. When he kind of is like, he totally misinterprets the way that his well, we'll get there anyway. Let's just keep reading. So anyway, the angel appears then to Manoah himself. So basically, he gets the answer to his prayer as he hopes, and let your words come to pass. And what will be the boy's rule of life be, and what was work be? Well, the rule of life is again the Nazirite vow. So, but he either wants to hear with his own ears, or he doesn't know what this really is all about, or he's just not getting it. I don't really know. But again, the angel says exactly what he has previously, been told. But again, Manoah doesn't seem to, something doesn't click. Let us detain you, he says in verse 15. We'll prepare a young goat for you. Is he just showing hospitality at this point, or what's in his mind? Well, the angel, of course, is not interested in having a meal on this occasion. But the reason, like we say, that things aren't just quite clicking is that we find that Manoah wants to honor the angel really more so than God. Get to verse 17. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name, that when your words come to pass, we may honor you?" So he believes in God, but really, I'm just picking up that he just doesn't really get what's going on here. And then, as we're going to see, Manoah, the angel doesn't tell him his name, but then the angel does something, wondrous, so that he knows that this is all from God, and gets this kind of confirming that he might have a little bit been looking for. In verse 19, Manoah took the young goat with a grain offering, and instead of it being for a meal for the angel, it becomes a sacrifice for the Lord. He offers it upon the rock to the Lord, and he did a wondrous thing while Manoah looked on it, and a flame goes up and consumes it. So we get kind of a bit of a confirming miracle. It's almost like there are these little echoes in the book of Judges. You'll note this from time to time. What does that remind you of, the sacrifice getting consumed like that?
With Baal and Elijah.
I don't mean echoes into future history. I mean echoes in terms of what's happened in the book of Judges.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. I mean, that happened then too, but it happened similarly in another case here in Judges.
Gideon's sacrifice.
Gideon's sacrifice, right? So Gideon had his sacrifice burned up as well. So all right. So we've kind of seen this before, and if there's any kind of oral tradition surrounding these judges, maybe Manoah might have heard of this, Gideon getting this confirming miracle from the Lord and so on. But if he heard of it or whatever, clearly he doesn't know it. And so this sacrifice gets burned up. Manoah knows that it's the angel of the Lord, verse 21. But he says, verse 22, we shall surely die because we have seen God. Well, again, something just missing in understanding there. And clearly there's a little bit more cleverness in his wife, because the wife then says, of course, in verse 23, well, if the Lord had desired to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering or a grain offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things, nor would he have told us such things as these at this time. So, I mean, none of this makes sense the way that Manoah is interpreting it. But again, you kind of set the stage rather awkwardly for the child that Samson's going to be. Father who doesn't really, for all of his good intentions, doesn't really seem to get it. We are going to have a son who really, really doesn't get it, but is much more, as we're going to find out, devious and self-serving. Yet it does happen as the angel says it will. Samson is born, and then he is endowed with the Spirit of the Lord. So verses 24 and 25, the woman bore a son, called his name Samson. The child grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Mahaneh Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. So the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him. That's what we're going to be kind of highlighting in our minds as we're reading. The Spirit of the Lord and its activity in, or rather his activity in what Samson does. Because we're going to see that when Samson wins his greatest victories, for the most part, with maybe the only one exception, that's particularly highlighted. And even with that one exception, there's an understanding that God is kind of having a hand in that event nonetheless, from the what's said previously. So any questions over kind of the setting the stage here, chapter of Judges 13 before we move into chapter 14?
Nope.
All right, sweet. So, and we just said that, know the movement of the Spirit of the Lord, Samson's wife. So Samson tells, so he's come of age now, fast forward, and he doesn't ask, notably, his parents to get him a Philistine for a wife. In chapter 14, verse 1, Samson went down to Timnah, saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. He went up and told his father, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me as a wife. And so that's wrong. All right. It would be wrong because of God's commands about foreign marriage. But it's also wrong because what is the oppressing force over the Israelites during the time of Samson?
The Philistines.
The Philistines. Remember back in chapter 13 and verse 1. So they've been delivered into the hand of the Philistines. So the very people that are causing his family, his people, his nation trouble are the very people that Samson finds himself over and over again, really, in his life attracted to. So, I mean, he doesn't care that they're the enemy. He doesn't care what they're doing to his people or the control that they're exerting over his people. He's just, sees woman after woman, as we're going to find out, and desires them. And so, and this is not just, as we're going to find in the case of Samson, a case of youthful lust. It continues even with age. So anyway, the text is kind of setting us up with the idea this is wrong, and there's going to be a number of times where we kind of get that sense. It's wrong because of God's commands about foreign marriage. It's wrong because this is the enemy, and it's also wrong because this isn't what his parents want him to do. So one of the first command with promise is to honor father and mother. Mom and dad say, isn't there someone among your brethren, amongst your people, that you could marry instead of from amongst the uncircumcised Philistines? And so they clearly don't want this to happen, but that doesn't matter to Samson. And somehow, even though his father and mother are against this, they go along with it. In fact, his father and his mother, go down, and they have this, as we're going to find, this wedding down here. But before that, we get this little interesting verse to wrestle with in verse 4 here. His father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Now, we knew that last part, but how can we know? I mean, how can this say, rather, that this is of the Lord or from the Lord? So what do you think about that?
I don't know what you're asking.
So
I thought it was a strategic move. Like, I know that God said not to do it, but I mean, would Samson have had, like, I mean, if he was, I mean, assuming his mum, taught him well and things, because I don't know if his dad really understood what, his mission was. But he would have known what his job was, wouldn't he?
Well, that's an interesting kind of question to ask, and this is where probably in this class we're going to diverge from what, even though it's not what I believe the text is presenting a clear picture here. The picture that we get in our Sunday school version is very different. We want to read Samson and think, we have this baby promised. There's going to be a special upbringing. We're going to have something akin to, like Samuel being brought up later, or like Jesus being brought up in the house of Mary and Joseph. But I'm going to suggest that the reason we get that picture in chapter 13 is to show that, mom has some idea, dad doesn't really have a clue. And when we get here, we have a son that's kind of living in rebellion. Though it could be argued that, there would be a tactical advantage, so to speak. What plays out isn't really that, like we see him having a crude bet with the Philistines at the wedding party, and then like storming off and then coming back and this weird tragic turn of events that sees this woman that he's married getting burned up, and as we're going to find out, I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but there's nothing really like warfare or tactical about how he's behaving at this point. And on top of that, the question you could ask is, does God ever command something that he condemns? Does God ever command something that he condemns?
No, but he can use the acts of the condemnable.
Right.
I'm thinking of, the Babylonians and using them as a tool to punish Israel. And as I've just been teaching a whole series on Daniel, and all the evil acts there that are nonetheless used to show the people of Israel who are watching what's going on, the power and protection that God still has, even though they're in exile. And certainly, we think of Judas, right? That just because a man decides to do something evil doesn't mean that God can't twist the outcome towards good.
And that's kind of that is the way that this is from the Lord. So the Lord is the one who effectively brings about Samson's life. We've got a barren couple, and so he enables a barren couple to conceive that previously was unable to do so. Samson has been set up in this place. Now, is is he worthy of this position? No. Is he even fully aware of this position? I don't think so. But at the same time, he's the man for the job. And to see God, behaving this way, I like that you brought in the Babylonians. I'd compare, what God does through Samson with what God does through the Babylonians. You can read the book of Habakkuk as a kind of case in point of how God operates in this way. So, in Habakkuk chapter 1, the prophet complains to God about how bad his people are, and he's told by God that, I'm going to fix the problem for you. I'm going to make the Babylonians come and defeat your people. And so Habakkuk's response to that is that they are worse than, how are you bringing this nation that's worse than us to punish us? At first he was talking about how bad his people were, but it's like, well, they're even worse, and yet, then chapter 2 rolls along, and God, thankfully the prophet's willing to hear out God and to listen to his answer, and the Lord, says, I've got a plan for this too. And he talks about how he intends to bring an end to the Babylonian nation, and then ultimately how through their conquest, his glory was going to be spread through the earth. And so God has a wonderful ability to bring good from bad. But I think that, when you're reading that statement, don't think that he's doing what the Lord wants him to do, but rather the Lord has prepared for this moment and has put things into place to see that his outcome, not the desired outcome of the people involved, is the one that is achieved. So, and God works in that way even today. The powers that be are ordained of God, ordered of God, set in order by God, as Romans 13:1 says. So God has a way of putting people into places at times, knowing their behavior. And in that same book, in the book of Romans, chapter 9 talks about how God had put Pharaoh into the position that he was, knowing how he was going to behave and knowing that through him he could work his plan of drawing glory to himself and giving a beginning to the Israelite nation. So again,
a quick question.
Sorry, yeah, sure.
Patrick. I just
yeah,
got a
no
quick
worries.
question.
Yeah.
In verse 4, my Bible, it doesn't have all capitals for God. Is it so? His father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity. Is that he? Is that capital H, or is that Samson? Samson was seeking an opportunity, or was it?
Sure, that is Samson.
That let me double check. I'm assuming that's God. I know that the ESV does not capitalize pronouns referring to God.
Yeah, so the
annoying. So
but the antecedent seems to be pointing towards the Lord there.
Yeah, I would say that. So you do have capital LORD, right, in the ESV?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we've got Jehovah there, and I think that in even though there are some times when the Bible unfortunately bucks our English trends, typically pronouns refer to their nearest antecedent, and I would say that yes, it is. Given what are your options in the sentence? His father and mother did not know it was of the Lord that he, who? The father, the mother, or the Lord? It can't be the mother, and it's not the father. So it stands to reason it's the Lord in that sentence. So yeah, so God is seeking an opportunity to move against the Philistines. And so he's going to set these events into place using this guy, Samson, to achieve his desired ends for his people.
Also, the idea that Samson is a wily mastermind conniving against the Philistines continues to break down the more you read about him.
Yeah, I mean, well, he has a certain cleverness about him, and certainly a bit of a bit of deviousness about him. I think that I well, we'll get to it. We'll get to the where we're kind of keep getting ahead of ourselves, but yeah. So anyway, I want to point out before leaving this little part here is that this is not what's right in the Lord's eyes, and so already we're kind of getting set up for where the book is heading. People are doing what's right in their eyes, and that's highlighted twice in this reading. You have chapter 14, verse 3. Go get her for me, for she pleases me well. And then in verse 7, he went down and talked with a woman, and she pleased Samson well. So this is what's right in his eyes, and that's of course going to later cost him his eyes. And I think other versions, even use the word eyes there. I think English Standard Version has the word eyes. So clearly, Samson, to kind of capstone this little part here, clearly Samson is not strong because he's good or moral. He's breaking God's commandments about Gentile marriage. He's going against honoring father and mother, and he's also doing what's not proper in the times. I mean, to marry someone from the enemies who's oppressing your people just doesn't ring like the kind of thing that you'd expect a good godly man of this period to do. So he's not strong because he's good or moral. Well, the text will move forward to identify other reasons that he's not strong. So Samson kills a lion, but note in doing that that it was the Spirit of the Lord who came mightily upon him and enabled him to do this. And just to, and again, the Spirit of the Lord did this even though he had nothing in his hand. I want you to just hang on to certain details, because later on, he's going to pick up something in his hand to defeat a lot of Philistines with. And yet, when we think about his vow and we think about God's expectations for Israelites, you'll wonder, was that the right thing to do? And with all these little details, what we're reading here in the life of Samson, there's a lot of question marks that are starting to crop into our minds. And the text is getting more and more ambiguous, and you're having to strain more and more at the details to go, wait, what? Is this right? Is this good? And I think that's all purposeful as the book kind of is grinding to its tragic end. So killing the lion, there's no problem, obviously, with that. But in terms of the eating of the honey that he later does, there is something wrong with that. So he gathers some honey. It says in verse 8, after some time, he returned to get her. He returned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. So he's rather pleased with his work here. He goes over and gets some of that honey and eats it. And then he comes and gives it to his father and mother. And they also ate, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Why didn't you tell them, Samson? Because earlier on, you remember that was another thing that's a part of this vow that he's taken in chapter 13 and verse 7. It said he's not supposed to eat anything unclean. And though, you say, what's wrong with honey? Problem's not the honey. The problem is that the honey has come from the dead animal.
It's from a lion's carcass.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's from a dead lion. And that means that both in terms of ceremonial uncleanness and the specific sanctification that was supposed to characterize Nazarites, he shouldn't be anywhere near the honey. Yet he's eating it and then going, "Hey, mom and dad, have some honey, ha ha ha," and just giving it to them and letting them, break their own commandments from the Lord without telling them that they're doing so. So That's wrong. And so clearly, Samson is not strong because of his vow, which, by the way, includes his hair. Ultimately in his mind, the vow gets boiled down to the hair, because later on we're going to see him say, and the text will specify that he says with all of his heart, if you cut my hair, I'll lose my strength or whatever. But at this point, the vow isn't just consisting of that, right? It's supposed to be that he's not supposed to be eating unclean things, as is specified in the text, and yet that's exactly what he does. So Samson, things move forward with the wedding to this Philistine woman, and what you have here is a typical kind of, like there's a feast, and at the end of this feast, they're like legally married as of having this feast, and then later there's going to be consummation of the marriage, and as we find out in chapter 15, he kind of returns hoping that the marriage can be consummated, and it won't be, as we're going to find out. But anyway. Chapter 14, verse 10, 11, he goes down there and brings 30 of his companions. Then he places a bet with the Philistines, and the bet essentially is over this riddle. So again, he's thought a lot about this lion and about this whole thing with the honey and all of that. This isn't just something that happened. And he's even thought about it to the point he's got this little riddle that he's made. And so he poses it to them in verse 14. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. It even kind of, sounds like you'd expect a riddle to sound these days. But in translation, I think they did a pretty good job with that. But anyway, they think about this riddle. The Philistines think about it. They have 7 days to figure it out. 3 days later, they're frustrated. They can't figure it out. Samson is clearly a bit more clever than his father was. I think you can gather that. And so the idea that we have, kind of the brainless brawn here. I don't know has anybody ever seen the Emperor's New Groove by any chance? Familiar with the character Crunk? You might be tempted to see Crunk in Samson, perhaps, but I think given this, that's not where you should go in your understanding either. He's not unintelligent, Samson. He's just motivated by base things and clearly full of pride. Well, the Philistines convince Samson's wife to find out the riddle. Not the last time rather this is going to happen, by the way, where the Philistines kind of use one of their women against him, and again, this speaks also to what Samson's doing here in the first place. Remember, Samson's kind of compromising who he is as an Israelite to cross the border and marry the Philistines. But the Philistines, when you think about their relationship with others, they're Philistines first, and then marriage comes second. Whereas for Samson, it's quite the opposite. His marriage comes ahead of the fact that he's supposed to be an Israelite. So she breaks him down, and finally gets him to tell her what the riddle is. And so when they reveal the answer, Samson realizes what has happened. So she goes and tells them, and they tell him, and he's like, well, I see what's happened here. And he responds to them by saying in verse 18, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. What does he mean, if you had not plowed with my heifer?
Calling his wife a cow.
He's called his wife a cow. And that's
but in a less funny sense, it's the person who was supposed to be allied with me, as my wife, as someone whose first duty was to her husband, has instead done the work of these people who I'm in competition with. As we talked.
Yep. So he's all at once, like it's just that's not a good thing to call. By the way, Joey and Nicholas, when you guys get married, don't call your wife a cow. That's not advisable at all.
I do have a slight question on that, just
Yep.
you know, for the not really a question we can answer here, probably.
Sure.
But you know, looking at Song and Solomon and whatnot, they seemed a lot more willing to refer to the beauty of their loved ones by comparing them to farm animals of all sorts.
That does happen, but I think that we've got a good, and I know when you're comparing even the Old Testament with the Old Testament, we're separated by hundreds of years, and oftentimes when we're trying to make comparisons, but it seems to me that heifer's a pretty uniformly derogatory thing in the Old Testament. You know, what comes to mind is you know, the you know, like the prophet Amos, and some of the things he says to the Israelites. I'm trying to think of where this reading is, but you know, like it's here. If I can find it, I might be. Mm, yeah, it's not where I thought it was, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. So, but yeah, you can do your search and find that that's kind of a pretty uniform thing in the prophets to use heifer derogatorily, and so yeah, not good. But anyway, even though he you know, even though he's angry at this point, it still says that the Spirit of the Lord, verse 19, comes upon him, and he goes down to Ashkelon and kills 30 of their men, took their apparel, gives the changes of clothing to those who explain the riddle. And so he honors the bet by killing other Philistines and then giving them the clothes. But then he's so angry that he just storms off and goes home, and he loses his wife in the process. How's this for a best man? In verse 20, Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. Clearly, that's an ancient custom, but to have a best man, but clearly not. Samson maybe isn't the kind of guy that has very close friends.
Well,
so
even in more recent, you know, European marriage, the point of the best man was to, if the groom couldn't show up to the wedding, he would marry the bride, because having, you know, unattached young women running around the countryside was deemed a danger. So, you know, get her married one way or the other to deal with the issue.
Yeah, that's why the guys all have they all wear tuxedos so that, you know, you can just move to the next one down the line. That's
they're replaceable anyway.
Yeah.
You know, one for the other, whatever.
Yeah.
I
No.
never knew that about that. That's interesting.
I
read it in a
did.
book, so it must be true.
I've kind of heard that as a joke before, but I've not heard that as a reality. But maybe, hey, I don't know.
I think it's a pretty old custom, but nowhere near as old as what we're reading here. So
Yeah,
it did
right,
continue
right.
forward for a while.
Yeah. So, how is it? Oh, yeah, we just talked about that. Has perception of his wife changed? Clearly not favorable. Samson has two weaknesses in spite of his wit. He has the first weakness, obviously, of women, and the second weakness of this really great inability, seemingly, to learn from the past. I mean, he really doesn't put two and two together, you know, because we've had the story of Samson in short here, haven't we? Where he desires a woman betrays him, that he desires, and you know, he's kind of seen this play out now, and yet that's going to be the story that is on repeat for the rest of his life, or at least the rest of his life as per revealed scripture. So anyway, Samson wants to complete the marriage. He changes his heart and goes back, and he goes back with a gift for dad, for future father-in-law in his mind, the young goat. And then he wants to go and solemnize the marriage. Let me go into my wife into her room, which is how that sounds rather coarse in us reading that, but that is seemingly how marriages worked back then. That, you know, the marriage ceremony culminates with the union of husband and wife, oftentimes in the familial house. So father says, well, tough luck. I actually thought you really hated her. And verse 2, and I gave her to your companion. What about her younger sister? Isn't she okay? Take her instead, in verse number 2. And so again, just kind of really a coarse and rough period of history. But now whereas before, in settling the bet, maybe he might have felt a little bad killing those guys to get the changes of garments to give to the other Philistines. Now he feels very justified in exercising some vengeance on the Philistines. You've taken my wife away from me. And so he goes out, he gathers 300 foxes. I can't imagine that would have been easy, but he does that, gathers 300 foxes, lights their tails on fire, and then sends them out to destroy their grain and their vineyards and their olive groves. So this is a pretty rough thing to do in this part of the world, that obviously depends on such things. So again, deal this blow, feels very justified in doing so. But the Philistines are not very happy about this. This isn't a good way to have an ongoing relationship with someone that you clearly desire. The Philistines respond by killing his wife and her father. In verse 6, it says they actually burned her and her father alive in this house, and then he responds to all of that by killing them. Now, this is the one time where, like I said, there is one time where it doesn't specify the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, but has the Spirit of the Lord in this case left him since chapter 14 and verse 19. And, if this is the one battle that he was able to win on his own strength, then that would be, obviously interesting. But I think that the Lord is still in what's happening and still, a part of the Lord's plan that we saw in chapter 14, verse 4, to seek an occasion to move against the Philistines. And so he is working against him through Samson with all of his deviousness in burning the crops and now killing an unspecified number of people. But it says dealing with them a great slaughter in verse 8, which, by the way, I remember the ESV doesn't say great slaughter, but that is probably closer to the Hebrew than the ESV has. So all of this escalates, Philistine Israelite relations. Philistines now gather a force and camp themselves against the Judean city of Lehi. The men of Judah say, "What's going on here?" They say, "Well, we just want Samson." And they're like, so the men actually go to Samson and say, "Do you realize what's happening here? And so we need to deliver you to the Philistines." And Samson's like, yeah, sure. As long as you don't kill me, you can tie me up and give me the Philistines, no problem. And so clearly has a lot of faith in himself and to kind of get out of this problem. And of course, he does. He's handed over to the Philistines, all tied up. Then chapter 15 and verse 14 says, again, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him mightily. The ropes that are around him are like flax that is burned with fire, and so no strength at all. He breaks free. And then what do we see happening? See the slides coming up another time. And then he escapes, wins this unconventional victory, but breaks his vow through what he uses as a weapon. So he finds a fresh jawbone of a donkey, which means now we don't have like a hardened skull kind of thing that oftentimes this is pictured as. It specifies a fresh jawbone of a donkey. So this is an animal that's just died, or recently died. And so he breaks off this jaw and then uses it and kills, it says, 1,000 men with it. And even is very proud of the fact. You can see that in verse 16. With a jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with a jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. But really, what's kind of clearly juxtaposed with the jawbone of a donkey. So he says, it was the jawbone of a donkey that killed 1,000 men. What really killed 1,000 men?
Power of God.
The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So see that I believe that's put in that verse purposefully, and it forms a contrast, and it forms a further contrast with what is specified about his victory over the lion. Does he need a jawbone in his hand? No.
I mean, he punches the first guy to death, grabs his sword, and it would be more efficient.
But
yeah,
but he wanted the jawbone of the donkey so that he could have his little song about it, probably. That's just the kind of guy that we're dealing with here. So Again, breaking his vow. He's not supposed to be touching unclean things or certainly not fighting with him. But interestingly, we find him after this victory, he's like very thirsty and he cries out to God, not the most prayerful of requests. You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. Wait, what? He's not attributing his victory to God? No, by the hand of your servant, he says. And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised? And so even though we don't have the most heartfelt or prayerful request, God grants the request and actually splits a rock, allowing him to drink. He revives, and that ushers in the beginning of 20 years of him serving as a judge. So evaluate your servant. I've kind of painted the picture, but you paint it for me. What do you think of Samson as a servant of the Lord based upon what the text is revealing?
He's a very selective servant.
Right. You know, to go back to Emma's point, like, does he have any sense of what he's doing? Well, I mean, yeah, to a degree. But if anything, we're seeing a man who is governed by doing things his way and not God's way. We've had 2 chapters of that, of information that would lead us to that conclusion.
Really weak.
What's that?
And like, he was really weak for worldly things.
Yeah.
Women and others.
Yep. Yeah, very, very driven by his impulses and very, very prideful. And as much as, it's easy to point the finger at Samson. Let's pause a little bit, even though we've been laying it thick on Samson to try to help to deconstruct the, maybe the Sunday school image of him in our minds. We do the same things. I mean, when you think about what a Christian is supposed to be, a Christian is synonymously a saint. A saint is a sanctified one. We are serving Jesus, the Nazarite, the one himself who is sanctified. All these things are purposeful, I think, that God had this vow of sanctification, and yet still this place called Nazareth, and yet this one who's the Nazarite, both the stemming of the branch and also clearly who he is, the holy, sinless, perfect Son of God. And so we serve him, and we're supposed to be called out people, and yet so often we can be persuaded, if it's not by relationships, it can be by other materialistic things, to set aside our vow and to fulfill our lusts. So I think that, even though we're seeing a very caricatured picture here, we are seeing a great temptation, and that we can face in different ways, and then also the tendency of even God's people to still, be like, well, I'm on your side, even though really nothing has been about, God or his side. So why did God grant the water? Is then the question. Why did God give him the water?
Because he saw something in Samson, like potential?
Yep, there is potential.
He still had work for him to do.
Still had work for him to do.
There's that.
Yeah.
And he has, in his own way, done the work that God set him to do up to this point. He has defeated the enemies of the Israelites. He has, slain the ungodly.
Yep.
And so, God presumably does recognize him for that, even if, as we pointed out, it's not always been for the right reasons, or perhaps in the way that would be best. My thing about when you talked about, that Samson does seem to be very intelligent, or capable of making good plans and thinking up riddles and doing all these things, but what he seems to be lacking in is wisdom, in thinking about the consequences of his actions, and thinking about, he's very reactionary, it seems, in the sort of way that a hedonist often is, when you're focused on yourself, then mostly what your focus is on yourself right now and how you feel right now, what makes you angry or what makes you sad or what you think will make you happy. That's one of the weaknesses of hedonism that we need to watch out for and keep away from, is that it also tends to limit your vision. Someone who's really hedonistic doesn't tend to think in the long term for themselves or about themselves any more than they think in the long term about other people. But as Christians, again, we're supposed to be looking in, having some part of our mind always on the far future, right? That some part of us is always being ready for the end. There, that we're not, well, we are in the moment and doing the best we can in the moment. That the thoughts to the future and thoughts to eternity, in fact, do inform the choices we make.
Yeah. And isn't it just characteristic of our God? I don't know if you get this in New Zealand at all, but it's very common amongst older Christians in the States. You ask the question, like, how are you doing? How's it going? Whatever. Well, you ask that. Have you ever heard the response, better than I deserve? It's a very typical old man response here. Better than I deserve. Does anybody say that? Maybe just a
better than I deserve, worse than I'd like.
Oh, well, not with that addendum. That's not,
that's one I've heard in the past.
That's not quite as good. But the better than I deserve is the acknowledgement that God does treat us better than we deserve. You could argue that really, like you said, Samson is very hedonistic in this text, and that everything that he's done up until this point has been by way of impulse. There hasn't been one sat down, planned out, thought out action against the Philistines. It's all just what do I feel like doing right now? And God has worked through that, and God has dealt a blow to an enemy of his people and set up what's going to be a period of his people having sway over that enemy with all of this. But it's not been Samson's plans as such, and yet God still chooses to be good. And so you'll find that even when we behave at our worst, God is still at his best. And I like that picture of God here, even though there are times when people do have to have judgment. It's a combination really of both things, that God has the long view with Samson, like Joey was talking about, and then also there's more work for him to do, but then it's a sign of God's goodness. I said both things. That's really three things, but yeah. So let's get into chapter 16, and Samson visits a Philistine prostitute and escapes being captured. So again, here we have yet another Samson. It's just not a good idea to be messing with these Philistine women. It's 20 years later, mindful when this is happening. So what's happened in the intervening years? We just don't know. But clearly, Samson hasn't changed. I think that's the reason the story is getting set up like this. So he hasn't changed who he is. So, he escapes, and then he's enticed by yet another Philistine woman. Well, cricket's not baseball, but baseball, you have 3 strikes, and 3 strikes, you're out. So we've messed up with 2 Philistine women, and now there's a third. And what we're going to find is that this ultimately is going to be Samson's downfall. But this woman in particular, though, kind of the first woman that he marries is coerced. This woman has actually been hired to discover or other tasked with the finding out the source of his strength, and hired to that effect in verse number 5. And so we find her doing as we've seen. She kind of whittles him down. 3 times she asks the source of his strength. 3 times he lies. And then on that 4th time, he finally succumbs to her pestering, which, as we learn in verse 16, she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. You get the picture of the proverb of the dripping faucet, just don't want to be there's a lot of strength in nagging, but not a lot of good in it. So don't take any hints, either women or men here, because men can also pester their wives as well for things that they want. So she he breaks him down, and then it says in verse 17, he told her with all his heart, all his heart. So this is what he thinks is the source of his strength. Like we said, Dad didn't get the Nazirite vow. Samson doesn't get the Nazirite vow. He's kind of whittled it down in his mind to the hair. Question is, has he ever really been a Nazirite?
I mean, we've seen him break it at least twice.
Yeah.
As far as the unclean things, and notably, in breaking it once, he then proceeded to kill 1,000 guys with the tool of the uncleanness. So,
yeah.
I
mean, this vow hasn't really ever meant anything to him other than just keeping the long hair, and he's certainly not been sacred or sanctified to God, which is what the purpose of this vow is supposed to be. And what's really then the source of his strength?
God.
All right. So he's not Hercules. He's not a demigod. He's a man who the Spirit of the Lord comes upon to give exceptional strength at periods. But in the same way the Spirit of the Lord can give him strength, the Spirit of the Lord can also depart from him, and also will depart from him. Well, I think this is a good time to take a little break before we wrap up the story of Samson and move forward. So we'll take a break, and then we will come back and continue.
5 minutes?
Yeah, usually probably about 10.
All
right. Okay, we're back, and picking up again here in chapter 16, about to wrap up the story of Samson. So, as we said, he's told now the source of his strength as he sees it. Delilah does what she was hired to do, even though his heart is clearly with her. Once again, her heart is not even a part of him at all. She betrays him and cuts off all of his hair, and his strength is gone. And he's captured and further humiliated. His eyes are plucked out, and he is set to the task of grinding grain for the Philistines. Somewhat ironic, given the fact that he had previously, lit the tails of the foxes on fire to burn their crops, and now he is tasked with grinding their grain as a common slave, or even probably lower than a common slave in terms of the kind of service that he's going to have to do. When you think about the how this reads here in verse number 20, it says, she says to him, the Philistines are upon you. That's what's happened all this time. But he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free. The question that kind of, I don't know that you can answer is, did he really expect to lose his strength? I know that he told her the source of what he believed to be his strength, but even with his hair cut, and I guess you could argue, although I don't know how successfully, that he didn't know his hair was cut. I think you would have to notice that, even if you've just woken up, if you've had, pounds and pounds of hair on your head, because that's what happens as your hair gets really, really long. He's not had a haircut his entire life. His hair's super long. He's going to notice it's not there. So did he think that he was going to lose his strength? And the answer might very well be no. Even though he told her what he thought was the source of his strength, maybe he's had so much belief in himself rather than in his God that he thought it would still be there. And so maybe not. I don't know, but I don't know, like I said, that you can answer that question. However, the text is very clear to point out why he doesn't have strength. It's because the Lord had departed from him. And again, the Lord is not his hair. The Lord is the one who has been giving him his power, and the Lord chose at this moment to take it away. Interestingly, though, the reality behind all of this is, first of all, that God was with Samson, and even working through his selfish, sinful choices. And even though, you know, what, even though, we see the Lord departing from him here, clearly God is not yet done with Samson. The strength departs from him, but he still has a plan. And I like the fact that there's this statement in chapter 16, verse 22. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. It leads you to the conclusion, if you haven't been paying attention carefully to the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, it leads you to the conclusion that really it was the hair that was magical. But that's not the conclusion I believe that we should draw, but rather, who is the one who thinks the hair has something to do with it?
Samson?
Samson.
And the Philistines as well.
Well, yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean,
Which
if they were super worried about it, then they would have cut his hair before they tied him up to the post and the temple and stuff. Like,
Yeah, sorry. That is one just weird thing I noticed there, given the situation, is if you do believe that that's what it was, and that's why they pulled off the whole plan, right?
yeah,
Then
right.
why not keep him cue balled?
Yeah, right.
You know, maybe they thought that, oh well, once he's been defeated, once he's defeated forever. I don't know. Got cocky themselves. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
I tend to look at the statement that his hair is starting to regrow, kind of like a more subtle, the Lord actually responding to this situation rather graciously, because had they, as you said, had the Philistines kept him cue balled, or had for some reason or another his hair not grown back, would Samson have even believed that there was a chance? I don't know. It's just one of those little details that the text gives us something that's pretty common sense, and that tells me that there's a reason why it's given us that detail. I'm a firm believer that the details of the Bible are all given for a reason. I might not always know what the reason is, but that's what stands out to me, or at least that's what I think as I read this. So Samson's story doesn't end in sinfulness, but it does end with a tremendous victory. And the Philistines have this feast to the god Dagon. They rejoice and bring out Samson and parade him as someone that they have defeated. They attribute the power of defeating him to their God. Our God is delivered into our hands, our enemy, the destroyer of our land, the one who multiplied our dead. And so they clearly have their own problems. One of the things to realize is that the sinfulness of the Israelites is not in isolation. What's true of the world around is that the world around has, they're subject to the statements that Paul makes in Romans chapter 1. They've given up on God. God has given up on them. They're attributing their power to false gods and worshiping the creature rather than the creator. So that's what's going on there, and they're going to get what's coming to them for that reason. We are doing the book of Ezekiel. I've told you guys that right now in our congregational Wednesday night class. And we're coming to the close of the first half of the book of Ezekiel, where God spells gloom and doom for the city of Jerusalem and the people of Judah. But then the way that he transitions to hope is to turn his attention in chapter 25 to all of these wicked Gentile nations and what the judgment that's going to come to them. God is never unaware of sin that is outside of his people. It's merely that judgment begins at the household of God. That's true in the New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 4 talks about that, and it's true here in the Old Testament. So Samson is judged. It doesn't mean that the Philistines aren't going to be. So if the text continues, before we move on to chapter 17, he finally prays and a much more prayerful kind of request. It's not, your servant's done all this, so get him some water. But rather, verse 28, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines from my two eyes. That's, though the motivation still might be a little bit incomplete, that's still a much more prayerful disposition than anything we've ever seen from Samson up until this point in the recorded text. So he doesn't say, I've got my hair back and therefore I'm strong. He says, strengthen me, I pray, acknowledging that the true source of his strength has really been God. Well, Samson takes hold of the two pillars, braces himself, pushes against them, and let me die with the Philistines, he says, pushes with all of his might. And it says that the dead he killed at his death were more than those he killed at his life. The Lord even sees that this man is given something that's really important in this culture, in this world, a burial. They come and they recover his body and they bury it in and amongst the Israelites, in the land of the Israelites. And at that point, again, the summary statement that he judged Israel for 20 years. So, any questions or thoughts about Samson before we move on and
I do have one question, but
Yeah,
this is from like the very beginning of class.
Yeah.
When you mentioned some of the decisions that Samson made that weren't great, or obviously weren't something that you'd be wanting to do as a Nazirite or a judge, when you mentioned not honoring his father and mother, in that particular context, is it because of the culture and the times that if you didn't, I guess, honor the decision of who your parents chose you to marry, that was a sign of not honoring them? Because I mean, I only know from my experience, and there's lots of things that I disagree with my parents, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I'm dishonoring them. Obviously, there's a way in which I can speak or interact with them, but just because I've decided not to do what they have suggested or recommend, to my to my 20th century eyes, it's not me dishonoring them. So in that situation, is it more of a cultural thing? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. And so what you're saying is that, has Samson become a man in his own right? And kind of the fact that he at this point is like hanging around home points to me to the idea that maybe he's not. But really,
Okay.
the reason I think about honor father and mother in this case is that you have mom and dad standing alongside of God with, maybe they don't have the full awareness of God's teaching on that, but still there's this biblical reality that they're not supposed to marry, people of the Gentile world. And this other really practical reality that these are our enemies, and so if ever there's a time where honor father and mother ought to come at the forefront, it's when they stand with God and giving us counsel against our course of action that is against God. So like today, and I would even say this, when we talk about when I do premarital counseling with people, I always talk about the leaving part before the cleaving part. The if not physically and geographically, certainly emotionally, we do have to leave and be on our own, and be willing to stand on our own 2 feet and make our own decisions. And I'm not saying that we can't do that, and at times that those decisions might, in terms of liberty or in terms of optional things, that those might not conflict with our parents at times. I don't think that we have to go lockstep with our family in order to honor father and mother. But if our mom and dad are standing with God, that really should be a time where we honor father and mother, if that makes sense. That's what was behind my comment.
Okay.
It's not just that they have a difference of opinion, it's that they're telling their son, hey, this is a sinful thing to do. You really shouldn't be trying to go down this road.
Yeah.
And then he kind of seems to almost bully them into, yeah, but do it for me anyway, because I want it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which isn't ideal, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you could add that to a long list of examples in history of permissive parents. One of the great issues of Hebrew history is how frequently parents don't manage to raise up faithful children, and I don't like the fact that the text does point out that they go along with him down to the city. And, it says, in verse 5 of chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother. I don't really like that. And it kind of says something a little bit about his upbringing and about the role that he has had in the home. The home seems to be revolving a little bit too much around Samson. And that can happen even
He's
today.
special, so we have to give him everything he wants.
Yeah.
He's
No,
chosen.
that's not how it works. That's called spoiling.
Yep. Yep. And how all the more beautiful that, when you think about God, bringing Jesus in the fullness of time, if anything, the few glimpses that we get into Mary and Joseph's home is that, we don't have a home that sort of, revolves around Jesus when they are happy to point out, when they feel like he's done the wrong thing, staying in the temple, although, there's nothing sinful about that. But you see a people of conviction. Joseph is a just man when he finds out that Mary's found a child. He's minded to put her away. It says in Matthew chapter 1. And so all the hallmarks are of a couple that knows God and knows His will. And I think that's the environment into which Jesus was born. So there is a way to do it right. Now you could argue that even though they did it right, that doesn't ensure that everybody goes right, because his brothers, when they grow up, they don't honor Jesus as they should. John chapter 7 says they weren't believers, but then they too come around in Acts chapter 2 and are counted amongst those who are believers. So anyway, a lot to be thought about with ancient parenting, and I kind of read the text sometimes as a parent, and think about what's happening here, and anyway, but moving on. So chapter 17. Theme at this point becomes there's no king in Israel. You kind of see this as a repeated refrain in the chapters that follow. There's no king in Israel, so what happens? Well, you get this little bizarre picture of a shrine being set up in Israel, in Ephraim in particular, by this guy named Micah. So how does it happen? Well, Micah evidently stole some silver from his mother. And so this man, it says in verse 1, for the mountains of Ephraim, his name was Micah. He said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here is the silver with me, I took it. So the son has stolen a large sum of money from his mom. Mom gets angry, places a curse upon the silver, which again speaks more to pagan idolatry than it does to anything having to do with God at all. And yet the Bible says that after this happens, his mother says, may you be blessed by the Lord. And that's capital Lord. This is their understanding of the way that God works at this time. And furthermore, what are we going to do with this silver? Well, she says, I'm going to dedicate it to the Lord. I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a molded image. And again, if we had Samson kind of breaking the fourth commandment, we now have really God being broken in his first three, right? I mean, he's not being honored in the way or for who, or his name or anything. Nothing about him is being honored here. and the specific prohibition to make a carved image, that's what they've decided that they're going to do. He takes the silver. He returns the silver to his mother, and then the mother takes it, and we go to a silversmith, and they make a carved image and a molded image, and they put it in the house of Micah. Well, Micah says, fantastic opportunity. Let's now make a shrine. So Micah had a shrine and made an ephod, which is, we've seen Gideon do that before. And we know that there's a problem with that. So he makes an ephod, he's got household idols, and he consecrates one of his sons who became his priest, which again is just, it keeps taking turns for the weirder. Why is he making his son the priest and not himself being the priest? Well, along comes first of all, why is this happening? Because in those days there was no king in Israel, and that's, again, like I said, going to be characteristic of what we're going to see in this little period of history with these snapshots that we get of Israelite history. Well, Micah attempts to make his shrine even more legitimate by incorporating a Levite priest. And again, this is one of those things where the Levite comes and you're thinking, well, the Levite's going to do what Levites are supposed to do, right? He's going to set the scene straight. He's going to be the teacher of the law that God designed him to be. And he's going to let them know that you guys can't have the ephod, you guys can't have the idols. If you want to honor the Lord, we've got to do this at the tabernacle. But Micah says to this Levite, "Where do you come from?" And he says, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem and Judah, and I'm on my way to find a place to stay. Why are you not trying to find the tabernacle and serve it alongside of other Levites?" Well, there's no king in Israel. Every man does what's right in his own eyes. "Dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me," which evidently was the role his son was playing before. Anyway, he says, "I'll give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance." And so the Levite says, "Sure, sounds like a deal." Goes in, and Micah consecrates the Levite, and that young Levite becomes priest and lives in his house. And the conclusion, verse 13, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me since I have a Levite as a priest." So what do we think of this little snapshot here?
It seems like they've forgotten almost everything about what it actually means
You're right.
to be to be an Israelite, right? Like they've remembered some of the words and phrases, but what that actually looks like, it's just so mixed in with the pagan stuff that it's, other than the nomenclature, essentially just pagan worship. It's like, okay, a Levite's supposed to be, heading up the worship of God. Sweet, we've got a guy who's called a Levite. What's he gonna do? Help us worship at a silver idol of household gods, plural. It's like, okay, no. You've got the right word, Levite. You've gotten everything else wrong. Ephods are supposed to be associated with worship of God. All right, sweet. We've set up an ephod as an idol. Again, you got the word ephod right. Everything else after that, you just have no idea what's going on. Which again, shows us that since Levite doesn't see anything wrong with this, even though they remember that they're Levites, remember they're supposed to be associated with this. Apparently, there's not enough teaching going on. So, whether this Levite doesn't know or whether, he's just not into it or whatever. No one's obviously taught Micah or his mother or anyone else who's involved with this the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So, and that's really, it's again, what can religion disintegrate to? That's the pause point for us, to really stop and think, how things can totally lose anything but their barest forms. We can very easily give into the temptation to gather around and have a little bit of crackers and grape juice on Sunday, rather than partaking of the Lord's Supper. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that what the Corinthians were doing was not taking the Lord's Supper. I don't read that the elements were wrong. I read that their disposition towards each other was wrong. Their focus was wrong. And so what they were doing didn't mean anything. And that's again also what we see here. So what happened to them can happen to us, and all the more the reasons why what goes with the form, the teaching, the function of that form is incredibly important.
It reminds me a bit of the probably the most common variant we see these days is like the Mormons, for instance, where the way they talk about things on the very surface level, you would think that they were a Christian denomination. But then you scratch anywhere below the surface and you think, oh no, this is a wacko pagan religion that just uses the same vocabulary as Christianity, but nothing else about it, right? Like they use the word Jesus, but they don't mean Jesus. They use the word God, but they don't mean God. It just shares the same vocabulary, and that seems to be where these people at. They've got the vocabulary of God, but not the meaning of those words.
I'll have to, because you brought it up.
So when they say God, what do they mean? Do they mean like Buddha, Ra?
Oh, it gets complicated, my friend. It is wild. There are diagrams.
I'll have to because you mentioned it, I'll try to remember to send you guys Mark Twain's appraisal of the Book of Mormon. It's actually it's pretty good. I'll have to send that to you. He wrote a book called Roughing It, which describes his kind of journey to the Western United States and then ultimately to Hawaii. But along the way, he stops in Salt Lake City. And anyway, I'll send you a little portion of that book to look at if I can remember. But let's move forward. Let me keep putting it up twice. All right. So in Judges 18, again, no king in Israel. And so the Danites use and then betray the shrine. So the Danites, what do I mean by Danites? I mean people from the tribe of Dan. They finally seek out inheritance. It says in verse 1 that up until this point, that they have not seized the inheritance that had fallen to them. So we began the book of Judges by talking about the unfulfilled conquest, and here's probably the greatest omission. The Danites have not found their place yet, and so good. You guys want to take up the task of seizing the land that God has given you. We've seen God be abundantly gracious in this period of history. And so when people turn to him, he turns to them and he blesses them. And so what happens? Well, they go spy out the land and all that. But en route, or that they go to spy out the land, but en route, they stop in the mountains of Ephraim and at the house of Micah. They come to the house of Micah, where the shrine is. Instead of consulting the Lord, they turn to this young Levite and they ask him what he thinks of this journey. And they say, please inquire of God. And that might very well be purposeful there in verse 5. Please inquire of Elohim, God, and maybe gods. And we don't really know, what that term it could actually be either, really. That we may know whether the journey on which we go will be prosperous. And so the priest says, we'll go in peace. And he knows, he's got the terminology right. Yahweh will be with you in your way. And so we legitimizes what they're trying to do. So they're doing what God wants, but this is not the way that God wants at all. We've seen, this fail in times past, and yet the increasingly as history moves forward, the absence of the evidence of failure doesn't mean that failure hasn't taken place. We're going to see, to make a long story short here, the Danites be successful in what they do, but clearly we can see from these first 6 verses that they're not doing it God's way. And previously, God has responded to that at different times with the attempt being a failure. So just because that doesn't happen here doesn't mean that we're really departing from the script. They're doing what's right in their own eyes. They spy out Laish, and then they spring a surprise attack in verses 11 through 13. 600 men are sent against it, and then in the process of doing it, they do win a victory. In the meantime, how are we going to celebrate this victory? We go back to Micah's house, and we're going to raid it. We're going to raid it, right? And so they go in and they steal his idols, they steal his ephod. The priest is like, "What are you guys doing?" Verse 18, and they say, "Shh, be quiet. Put your hand over your mouth. Come with us and be a father and a priest to us." Everybody's wanting the priests to be fathers. You can see, this is a little, I don't know if this is the purpose of this language or not, but everybody wants a father figure in this period of history. We got a lot of bad dads, and there's a reason why perhaps later Jesus doesn't want us to seek father figures, religiously speaking. in the terms of the Father to us. Matthew 23, call no man father upon this earth. But anyway, they say, is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be priest to a tribe and a family in Israel? So they tell him the story. You're going to be our priest. Just be quiet. Come with us. And so they take everything from Micah. Micah's like, what's going on here? When he realizes what's happening, and he catches back up with them, and they say, you've taken away my gods, which I've made. Now, here's the truth that comes out, obviously. You've taken away my gods, which I've made, and the priest, and you've gone away. What more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails you? The children of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life and the lives of your household. So that's reading between the lines, quite a threat. And he walks away, and the Danites get their city. Laish, becomes their city. They call it Dan after themselves, after their tribal name. And whereas they promised the Levite this position of honor amongst them, instead they get someone from the tribe of Manasseh, interestingly, and they make him their priest, and then they still use Micah's carved image that he made at the house of Elohim, which was in Shiloh. So what do we think about this picture?
Lol. They lied to the Levite.
Just right. Quiet. It's just like, things are just so like yucky, and God's realized, well, not God didn't need to realize anything, but at least in this book we can kind of see that the oppression doesn't work. Like they're not getting the message, and there's a failure here. There's no authority. There's no leadership, and it's setting us up for what we said when we were introducing this section of history, setting us up for the period of kingship and the ultimate need for a king. And of course, that whole period, as we said in the beginning, we'll say again now, that whole period sets us up with the realization that there is no human king worthy to wear the crown, and ultimately, all of this foreshadows the need for Jesus. So, no king in Israel, and so the tragedies continue. So, again, we're just going to take a pretty bird's eye view of this. This is heavy reading, to say the least. You find that a Levite goes to Bethlehem to bring home his concubine, and she has played the harlot against him, it says in verse 2. She's gone, and he comes and gets her, and on the way back, he stops at the house in Gibeah, and it says, he goes and stays in the house of this old man, and you think, well, finally, we're going to get a nice little picture of hospitality and kindness in the midst of all this darkness. The man says, "Peace be with you." Don't spend the night outside. And brought him into his house in verse 21. But while they're there, while he's there enjoying hospitality, we find a scene not too dissimilar to the scene that plays out in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? You find that these perverted men beat on the door, and they want to know the man who came to them carnally, just like in Sodom and Gomorrah. And I think that, of course, again, the details that are chosen here are quite purposeful. Israelites reading this, would be well aware of, or at least faithful ones who would bother to read the book of Judges. They would be well aware of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, and how these similarities line up. It doesn't happen as it happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, of course. Instead of the old man, doing anything, to protect all of those who have come under his roof, he does offer the virgin daughter, but also the man's concubine. And so they send out these women And you know, he wants to send out the women, but the men only took the concubine, it says in verse 25, and they rape her to the point where she dies. And so really, really, really tragic thing. But then again, the bizarre enters into the picture again. Rather than calling upon the God to do anything or any kind of appeal to God, seemingly in any way, the man, the Levite, he takes a knife, he cuts up his concubine into pieces, and he sends it out, sends the pieces of her body out to the 12 tribes. And all who see it are of course shocked at the whole thing. It says, no such deed has been done or seen from this day, from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. So at least we do find some sense of moral outrage amongst the people, as we've seen, who are increasingly growing immoral. They gather an assembly, but the noticeable thing that as you're reading through verses 1 through 7 is just not really any reference to the Lord, right? I mean, they're gathering together. They want to know what's happened, and when they hear what's happened, they have a solution. Verse 8. So all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go back from his tent nor turn from his house. This is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. We will take 10 men out of every 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, 100 out of every 1,000, 1,000 out of every 10,000, to make provisions for the people, that when they come to Gibeah and Benjamin, they may repay all the violence that they have done in Israel. So they unite together. They're going to get their army together. But where's God in all of this? And he's really just not there. And that's again the point. There is no king in Israel, and every man just does what's right in his own eyes. And so it shouldn't surprise us that because God's not in the picture, even though we saw the Danites win their battle, really we are just we're not seeing God on any side of this at all. Benjamites are all really held responsible for this, and they come to the aid of their Gibeonite brethren. They strike first, and in doing so, do so successfully. And the Lord is finally in the picture here, because really we're not interested at this point in justice or taking out the guilty. We're interested in vengeance, and so as the text says, they send out their warriors against this, with the Lord specifying who's going to go, and Benjamites win on both these days of the battle. It says in verse 25, Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah on the second day and cut down to the ground 18,000 more of the children of Israel, all those that drew the sword. So Israel manages to recoup and to make a long story short, devise a successful plan that sees them victorious, so much so that they reduce the Benjamites down to a mere 600 individuals. And this causes, again, national outrage. It shouldn't have gotten to this point, but that's where we are. And so what is going to be our solution? And again, tragedies multiply. They destroy to kind of fix this problem. They don't want to give their daughters as wives to these Benjamites, but they don't want the Benjamites to be gone either. And so they find that no one from Jabesh Gilead has come to the assembly, and as a punishment, they go and strike down Jabesh Gilead. They kill their own people, and then they capture the unmarried young women and give them over to the Benjamites. And then there's still some unmarried Benjamites. And so what are we going to do? We will instruct them that they can go. There's some ladies that are unmarried in Shiloh that have this thing where they go out and dance. And you go and you capture these women and you carry them off and you make them your wives. And that's it. And it says in conclusion of the book, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone was right in his own eyes. And that's kind of how the story ends. So Any questions or comments as we wrap up the book of Judges? I'm sorry we had to kind of plow through. I wanted to spend some time with Samson, but any thoughts as we wrap up this this book?
It's honestly a bit baffling how, well, I guess not actually. I mean, it still always gets me how far they could fall from what was
Yeah.
okay.
And all of it begins
But it happens
with.
so. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that all of it begins with a generation simply not choosing to to take ownership and know the Lord. As we talked about, the opening of the book of Judges, I'm not 100% sure that it wasn't that they weren't taught, although, like we've said, successful parenting is just something that's noticeably absent from so many of the accounts of Hebrew history. But they had the Lord around. The tabernacle was there. The knowledge, the information was there. They just chose to forget it. And as they choose to forget it and choose to stop pursuing the Lord, he grows more and more distant from them. And just yeah. But Emma, you had a thought?
I mean, yeah, I just think it's so indicative of, like, even now in these days, like things that we thought were really sort of black and white and everyone understood what was right and wrong about something, or but things are being questioned now, and like moved so far away from any sort of truth, like not just biblical truth, but scientific truth as well. And it is really, but it happens so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's, I just wonder, would they have had access? They wouldn't have had access to the Psalms or Proverbs because they wouldn't have been written yet. So I wonder if, like, some of these examples are like, life, these are the consequences of life without wisdom, because a lot of the things that, Samson, for all intents and purposes, his mum and dad, God came to his mum and dad. That's pretty amazing. They, their son was was a Nazarite, and dedicated, was meant to have a life where he was, a servant and dedicated to godly things. And so there's all those sorts of intentions and things are there, but then it's just sort of basic wisdom that ends up kind of leading to, the lack of basic wisdom leads to some really foolish decision making.
Yeah.
And it's like, because I mean, even the way that, like, Samson talks about that, the woman from the Philistine, right, in 13th, the first chapter where he's involved, chapter 13, and that's like, it's just like lots and lots of little things, but they end up leading to really big things, and then all of a sudden, people are just not turning to God at all. Anyway, it's just interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's
lack of wisdom.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought, and yet you think about, I mean, how often are the Psalms and Proverbs even consulted when we do have them? I find that when it's like you just don't hear systematic studies of those books that are supposed to be granting us wisdom, right? You just
but it's all there if we even need it. Like,
absolutely.
there have been decisions in my life where I've been like, okay, I really need, I could, in terms of the word, I could go either way with this decision, and it's not going to be wrong, but is it wise? What are the, and looking at, the consequences of particular characteristics as well. Like, we've got all this sort of modern day psychology now, and lots of, personality tests and all these things, but it's actually all already in Psalms and Proverbs. And it's just about us, like, giving the credit to God and going there. Like, it's not, and it hasn't changed. He said that, like, he constantly says it, like, I've got the truth. This is actually all you need. Not that I have anything against, all of it, but I'm just saying sometimes I think we give credit, and it's like, sometimes there's sort of this narrative that it's new, and we need this sort of new stuff, and it's actually like, well, no, it's actually been there the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of my apologetic challenge to people. So like apologetic as in defense of the faith kind of challenge to people is try to think of something that you regret that God didn't talk about in the Bible at all. Like some, and I'm not talking about like, oh, I missed out on a sale or, that kind of regret, but like a genuine, I did something wrong there, or I really shouldn't have done that. Try to think of something that you regret that God didn't have something to say about. And you'll find that, even things that you might not think are, related to things. I mean, I often tell the story. I won't tell the whole story now. On myself of a time in life where I actually ruined a relationship that I had with a family, a fellow Christian family, and it's because my wife and I were gonna, we sought help from this family, and they were going to extend help to us via something that God actually said was unwise, called co-signing. We ended up backing out of it before that, but they kind of interpreted us backing out of it as all at once not fulfilling our word in the business deal, and then also not. I think that they were trying to show their love in doing that and extending that offer in the first place. And but long story short, if either of our families had reflected upon what God says about co-signing, then we, would have said that that's really not something that we want to do. That's the beginning of a path that can lead to difficulties. The constant refrain in the book of Proverbs about that is that if you're in this relationship, get out of it, and if you have an option, don't get into it in the first place. And so if we'd stopped and thought about that, then maybe we wouldn't have done it in the first place, and maybe there'd be a different outcome. I don't know. But I tell that story just to say that, even things that we don't, always connect with God having wisdom on, chances are he does have wisdom on it. And, if we would just do as you say, if we would search and find that wisdom, then our life would be a whole lot better. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the book of Judges. So we've now completed Joshua and Judges. So we will probably in the next 24 hours going to be sending you out a test. Got deadlines on that. And my thoughts are about that you would try to recreate a good testing environment.
Yeah.
Try to be free from distractions to the extent that you can be. It's not meant to be open notes, open Bible. And I'll repeat all this in the email that I send to you. But that's going to be coming to you. And then, Lord willing, we will start with the book of 1 Samuel next week. Any closing thoughts or questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Been so good.
Yeah, cool. I'm really glad you guys have been a part of this study. And really quickly, Joey did ask if there was homework, and there's only that assignment. Just check that syllabus. There's only that kind of that paper that I have kind of due at the end of the class. And again, the details of that are that's just meant to be like a little bit of an essay. It could be as long or as short as going to be challenging to you, but there's no like week to week homework as such. We want you to read these books, obviously, between classes. And so maybe preparation for next time, between studying for test, I know, but try to start on 1 Samuel, and then you can try to read that over the weeks that we'll be studying it. All right. So let's wrap up with a closing prayer. Most holy God, we thank you, Father, so much for the blessings of this evening. This evening we've been able to share in our in study of the book of Judges. We thank you for what you've shown us in the life of Samson, and also in the tragic pictures with which the book of Judges comes to an end. We pray, Father, that you will help human history to divert from scenes such as we've seen unfold in the close of the book, and certainly that such things would never play out amongst God's people today. We pray, Father, that you will please help us to know no other way but your way, and not devise idols for ourselves in ways other than the way you've granted. bless our weeks between this meeting and next, and help us to be led far from temptation and to be the people you'd have us to be. And we offer this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right.